In this video, I wanted to look at an interesting chap called Jordan Peterson. The title of the video I'm thinking of is Leave Him Alone, the Jordan Peterson story.
Do we really want to see a 25-year-old woman leave behind 2 children and die? Have we learned nothing from Anna Nicole Smith? I know it's hard to see
Jordan Peterson,
a human being, but trust me, she is. She's a person. She's like you or I. She's a human! What you don't realize is that
Jordan
making you all this money and all you do is write a bunch of crap about her. Speaking of professionalism, when is it professional to publicly bash someone who's going through a hard time? Leave
Jordan
me alone!
I really want to get over some of my feelings about the guy because I kind of admire him in many ways, but I think he's suffered an awful lot. I think he's probably feeling quite embattled in many ways. And I kind of think we should leave him alone a little bit now because he's just suffered so much trying to do what he thinks is right, which I'm going to look at. Okay, Peterson has described himself as a classic British liberal, which is very different from an American liberal. Classic British liberals might be more related to David Hume, basically people who care deeply about liberty as their primary reason for being. I wanted to talk about how Peterson understands the world because I think it's quite important in understanding the guy. So he is a psychologist first and foremost, and he believes that the world is constructed through the mind, basically. So there might be a physical world out there which actually exists, but as far as Jordan Peterson is concerned, that is purely incidental. What matters is our human understanding, because our minds are susceptible to a lot of different psychological conditions, let's say. That means that our view of reality is also subject to those psychological conditions. He views everything as a creation of the mind. So when you say, does God physically exist? He says, well, what do you mean by God? He isn't avoiding the question. It's kind of interesting. He is actually giving his honest answer, because if the whole world is constructed by our brain, then our understanding of what God is will also be constructed by our brain. So it isn't a question of, is there a physical God out there in the universe? It's a question of, what do you mean by God? That is the answer. Okay, in 2016, Peterson released a series of YouTube videos criticising the Act to amend the Canadian Human Rights Act and Criminal Code, Bill C-16, passed by the Parliament of Canada to introduce gender identity and expression as a prohibited grounds for discrimination. He didn't think that you need the government to come in and to enforce pronoun laws on people. He thought because Canadians are very polite, you should use politeness, basically. So, if a student came to Jordan Peterson and said, look, these are my pronouns, would you use these? Jordan Peterson has said, yes, he would use these, but it is discretionary. It is basically up to the individual to decide what kind of language they use instead of the government basically enforcing their views ultimately through violence. Let's say, for example, a university lecturer, for whatever reason, didn't want to use pronouns, or perhaps they didn't really understand them, or they forgot. For example, should they be thrown out of their job, potentially facing losing their house if they have a mortgage, potentially causing other problems in their life, such as, I don't know, failing relationships. And if they get kicked out of one university for failing to use the correct pronouns, then they're probably going to find it difficult to get another job in the field. This is doing violence against the person, you know, taking away their income. And it kind of creates a really hostile working atmosphere because you're constantly on edge. What if I say the wrong word? What if I use the wrong pronoun? It doesn't make people very happy or relaxed because they're always kind of thinking, well, what if I say the wrong thing? I'm going to be punished. I'm going to be thrown out of my job. I'm gonna, you know, potentially have my life destroyed because I failed to use someone's correct pronoun. Anyway, this is just Jordan Peterson's view that I'm trying to convey. This is kind of why he didn't like this bill, because he thought that language should be based on politeness and not on government compulsion and force. Which you can kind of understand. You know, why should the police be sent in to arrest someone and to drag them off to prison because they used the wrong pronoun? Or, even worse, arguably, to have a sort of committee grab someone and take them in and accuse them of being a wicked, evil person, etc. Which actually happened to a person Jordan Peterson was defending.
The period of the debate is slightly different than being like, okay, this is like a problematic idea that we maybe want to unpack.
But that's taking sides.
Yes.
Like, it's taking sides for me to be like, oh, look at this guy. Like, everything that comes out of his mouth is BS, but we're going to watch anyway.
Okay. So I understand the position that you're coming from and your positionality, but the reality is that it has created a toxic climate for some of the students.
How many?
It's great that...
Ooh, like how many?
Okay.
One?
May I speak?
I have no concept of like how many people complained, like what their complaint was. You haven't showed me the complaint.
Yes, I understand that this is upsetting, but there's also confidentiality matters.
The number of people is confidential?
Yes.
Although the university apologized publicly for its treatment of Shepherd, as did Rambukkana, it is not clear at all that the powers that be, so to speak, learned their lesson, and the mistreatment of Shepherd not only continued, but arguably intensified. So, she decided to press her case legally and presented a statement of claim against the three and Wilfrid Laurier early in the second week of June. It lists in painful detail the many ways that this situation was mishandled during and after the initial inquisition. I also discussed the situation with Howard Levitt, Shepherd's lawyer. I decided that Wilfrid Laurier had learned very little from its public embarrassment and that Shepherd's claims were valid, justifiable, and necessary, including her statement that her future lack of employability in academia was improbable, to say the least. I've been on hiring committees, and I can tell you that even the slightest whiff of scandal is enough to disqualify a candidate.
She was called into a meeting where she was basically attacked on the grounds that she showed her students a Jordan Peterson video. Jordan Peterson has suffered a lot, especially recently. He had issues with his wife. His wife had cancer. Jordan Peterson had been attacked for years, basically, by people who didn't agree with him. Honestly, if you are a public personality on the internet, then there will probably be some people who disagree with you and some people who want to troll you, and this can be unbelievably wearing because we're all human beings. So if you feel like you're constantly under attack, this can kind of really wear you down over time, and Jordan Peterson certainly felt like he was under attack.
So keep that in mind. It's not amusing. There's nothing to it. There's nothing for it. The thing that's also quite appalling is that there's... Let's go with this.
It's best to let the unreasonable opposition speak, because they manifest themselves as unreasonable, and then everyone can see it. And so that's part of the reason that you want free speech, right?
Human beings grew up in tribes, and when you feel like you're under attack, that can be unbelievably stressful. And even when he goes online, even though I'm sure most people kind of like him, who kind of hang around with him virtually, there's, I think, a lot of people who probably disagree with him or don't really understand what he's all about, or they just hear his name and they think he's kind of a bad guy. I think a lot of people have this kind of understanding of some people are good and some people are bad, and you know, you just feel that's one of the bad ones because that's what you've been told or whatever, perhaps through misinformation or whatever else. Perhaps people put labels on someone else, calling them a bad word or something. He took benzodiazepines for a while, which were recommended to him by his doctor to help deal with the stress of the fact his wife had cancer. Tammy made a full recovery, thank goodness. He was unbelievably stressed. I think he lost his position teaching, not necessarily because he was thrown out of where he was working, but simply because any students he produced would have Peterson's name on their resume. And like Peterson said, if they are going to become a professor and there is any whiff of controversy about them, or they're going for a teaching job, for example, they won't be hired. They'll just be passed up and someone else will get the job, because universities are quite conservative and they really don't want anyone kind of controversial in there, because universities are so scared, partly because of stuff like C16, where if you say the wrong thing, then you can face the wrath of the state, potentially losing your job. So Peterson discovered he couldn't teach anymore because students would suffer if his name was attached to them, which is freaking horrible if you ask me. His wife had cancer. He took benzodiazepines and he had a very, very bad reaction to them. I think it's called a paradoxical reaction, but he ended up having to go to a clinic. He suffered pneumonia. He was in a coma for a long period of time, and it wasn't clear whether or not he would even survive. He was there for quite a long time too, and thank goodness he did survive. I just kind of think we should leave him alone. He's been making some very interesting podcasts with a lot of different people recently, but even if you might not agree with his view, even if you think that state-mandated speech codes are wonderful and everyone should be subject to the long arm of the law constantly looking down at you, sort of saying, well, you can't say that, you have to say this. He's genuinely a good guy who's trying to help people. Jordan Peterson has said, and I think it's absolutely true, huge numbers of young men and women have come to him and they have said, look, your work has helped us. Thank goodness he recovered. Thank goodness his family's okay. I won't go into his dietary issues, but he has had severe depression for many years, and he found the only way he can really deal with that is by eating only beef and salt, because everything else kind of causes a very, very bad reaction. I really, really, really wish him the best of luck in all of his future ventures. Leave Jordan Peterson alone. Yeah, if you do enjoy this content, do let me know. Leave a little comment. I do read every comment. So yeah, let me know what you think, and I'll speak to you guys soon.